With 162 chapters, Mashle had just become one of the shortest battle shonens in Weekly Shonen Jump to reach a natural conclusive ending. And I've been convinced to talk about it. Now that it ended, what's my opinion of it? What did I think it did well, and more importantly, where do I think it failed? And before we get into my review, I need to be transparent with you guys. Even though I followed this manga weekly since its very first chapter, I'm not a fan. I'm not a nader either. I think Mashle isn't without merit, but I can consider myself a fan. To understand why, let's talk about Mashle. Mashle's first chapter was released on January 27, 2020 as part of the very first batch of the year. It was released alongside two other manga, Dead on Luck and Guardian of the Witch, and in the weeks before its release it was the manga that people were paying less attention to. While the fact that the other two manga were going to be pure battle shonens probably helped, the fact that Mashle was releasing as a gag manga at the exact time that people were becoming tired with all the new manga in the genre in Shonen Jump also had something to do with this. However, once that first chapter hit, people were talking about it. A lot of eyes were turning to the series for reasons that I don't really think were that great. Mashle implemented elements of multiple things, to the point where it was hard to figure out if it was a ripoff or a parody. The humor seemed to be extremely inspired by one, the other of One Punch Man, as well as the main character, Mash, seemingly to be a mix of OPM Saitama in essence, and Mob Psycho's Mob in looks. The plot synopsis was basically the same as Black Clover. The story takes place in a world where almost everyone has magic, and people are extremely prejudiced against those that don't. Our main character, a poor, extremely buff peasant, has no magic to call his own, so they decide to reach the top of the magic world to prove that even without magic, they have their worth. And of course, the world was literally Harry Potter. Like, that was definitely on purpose. So even though we definitely did the art thing of getting a lot of people checking it out and talking about it, at this point very little of this discourse was actually about Mashle's quality as its own product, and more so on people's opinions of the mismatch of previous ideas. That isn't to say that a lot of people didn't like the first chapter, but personally I thought that without finding its footing, this one was going to have an hard time surviving. The highlight of the chapter to me came in the one joke in the whole thing that made me laugh. This one. For all that I'm about to say, this joke and repetition of it right afterwards is just pure comedy. The timing and expressions are great, and it's a joke that actually uses the honestly lacking quality in Arcel in its favor. Like, Mashle's art is going to prove somewhat, especially when it comes to usage of what I'm pretty sure are just computer graphics, but this isn't it. However, it wasn't going to be one laugh that would sell me on this manga, because we didn't need gag manga at this point. I mean, we had Gravity Boys from the previous batch, Mitama Security that had been running for about a year, and Missioner's Girl Family was still very much at its gag phase. And I thought, and honestly still think, that all of them are a better gag manga than Mashle ever was. But it doesn't matter what I think, what matters is if it sells, and Mashle sold. I remember the manga really kicking into a year when Lance was introduced, and the second volume of the manga getting out of the shelves pretty quickly, getting over 25,000 volumes sold in its first week alone. Whether I liked it or not, Mashle was here to stay. And to be fair, I think the early part of Mashle was good enough to justify that, because despite everything, Mashle excelled at one joke, and the good part of Mashle is that the manga was built on that joke. Seeing the wizards being so full of themselves, boasting and hyping themselves up to the point where you hate them, just for Mash to appear and beat them up in the most satisfying, funny and cathartic way possible was always good. No matter how many times it happened, even towards the end of the manga, this was true. Mash works best when he's this unstoppable force of sheer will that can destroy anything, but chooses to fight for good. Mash doesn't need hardships, he doesn't need to struggle with his opponents, because Mash isn't the guy you're supposed to relate to with your struggles. He's supposed to be the guy that will be there for you. Nothing can stop Mash. That's why we love him. However, you can't really have a long-running narrative that depends exclusively on this one thing. This was the problem that One Punch Man came across, and it's a problem that Mashle, as it became clearer it was going to stay, started facing as well. Mashle became more serious, especially starting from the Divine Visionary exam arc onwards. Not completely serious, nor gritty or dark, but it started to be less about the jokes and be more about the battles, the characters, and the world. And this is something that worked wonderfully with the previously mentioned Yozakura family. Both of these series shifted to a more action-based storytelling, becoming a bit more serious, but without ditching their gag origins completely. There's a big difference between Mission Yozakura and Mashle when it comes to their executions, and I think that has all to do with the battles, the characters, and the world. Mashle's strongest point when it comes to fights is the cathartic beatdowns the opponent receives from Mash, but moving forward we start to see fights be longer, with enemies having brand new powers and sidecasts starting to be featured more. Which sounds good if you want to have a battle shonen. The problem is that once you remove what makes Mashle different, it ceases to be different. The manga, especially in the middle, becomes awfully dull. It's not like the fights are bad, but when compared to One Piece, Jujutsu Kaisen, Undead Unluck, Sakamoto Days, My Hero Academia, Black Clover, Mashle just lacks anything that really competes when it comes to spectacle, choreography, power system, and even just plain compelling storytelling. It's an okay battle shonen in a sea of much better ones. When it comes to the world, any attempt to take it more seriously and to differ from Harry Potter at this point is bound to fail. This has been a blunt parody. Everything up to this point has literally been lifted from Harry Potter, from the places to the rules to the characters. Mashle's final villain is going to be Voldemort, even if it is not. Nothing will make me think of this world as anything else but the Harry Potter world. And finally, the one aspect I'm pretty sure people will disagree with me, the characters. It's a strange thing, characters will always make it or break it for me. More than anything else, if your manga has a cast of characters who mesh well with each other, I'm going to love it. It's why Dorodoro is my favorite manga. The characters individually are great, but together they are extremely fun and make me want to read more. Strangely enough, I think the characters individually in Mashle are good. Mash I've talked about, but Lance is just really cool and badass, and Finn's story arc throughout the manga is honestly pretty compelling, especially in his final battle with his brother, which to me is the highlight of the entire series. Dot and Lemon can be annoying, but they're honestly far from being the worst characters, so why? Why is it so hard for me to enjoy them as a group? When I tell you that this is something that has been haunting me for most of my time reading Mashle, I mean it. It just feels like every chapter, every panel of this group interacting with each other, which normally is my favorite part of a manga, is just annoying and cringy. That will legitimately be the word that describes my reaction towards it the best. I cringe. And comedy is subjective, I get that, but I just don't think most jokes in Mashle really land. They all seem forced, which sucks for a manga that is heavily built upon its comedy. All in all, I don't think Mashle excels at most of things that it does. It really is just the way that Mashle destroys its opponents that saves it. And as we go through the story and the lore becomes deeper and less interesting, introducing a final villain that is underwhelming, it all leads to a final arc that... fuck. It ain't that bad. Like I mentioned before, the characters individually are good. As we reach their respective final battles, it was actually quite nice to see their character arcs reach their conclusions through fighting. Plus, some of Mashle's previous villains were somewhat interesting, and it was good to see them return as allies. The highlight to me again was Lynn's fight. It was the most emotionally invested I was at any point in this series. The final battle, it's over the top in a way that works with Mashle and it goes back to its origins in a grand way. Plus, with 160 chapters, this manga doesn't really overstay its welcome, nor does it feel rushed, which is honestly not something we can say about 99% of Shonen Jump titles. Most battle shonens will be dragged to hell and see themselves being pushed to a conclusion that can't possibly tie all the knots that they were forced to write. In that regard, Mashle is a breath of fresh air. So, all in all, was Mashle good? I think it had some good parts, but both in comedy manga, action manga, and comedy action manga, there are better options in the magazine right now. But it was alright. And it did end well. And that's not something you can really say about every manga out there. There's some that just outright get cancelled. If you want to see me talk a little bit about cancelled manga, please click the video on the left, and if you watched it till here, thank you very much, and I'll see you next video.